Okay, let me just advance it. There we go. So the agenda today, we got a lot of exciting areas to cover. I'm going to cover it from, throughout all these. Think of this at sort of in three phases, right? One phase or one facet of this is really as a consumer. So we're all consumers out there. The other facet that Rachel and I will speak upon is from a business perspective. So most of us are employees at businesses that we work for and represent. And as such, there's certain things we'll be looking for as it relates to supply chain and working with third-party providers. And then lastly, as a third-party provider, so many of us or some of us are service providers. And so as such, you've got a different sort of view and perspective on what's needed from your side and how to best serve the businesses you serve and all of us who serve the consumers as a business or as a third-party provider. So we kind of got through the welcomes, and again, always thanking ISACA for these opportunities to kind of share knowledge and kind of have a two-way, hopefully, conversation through this. So if at any point you folks have questions, pepper Nick with those, and he'll stop us and ask us questions. First few slides, I'll be doing a little bit basic intro with Rachel, kind of an overview of the different specific areas that we're going to try to delve into, and then we'll move to the businesses that are using vendors and what kind of that sounds strong there, what to demand, but really what you need to look for, right? You're representing your business and certainly the consumers in your area that you support, right? So you've got a lot of responsibility there with that process. And then there's no shortage for the next area, which is stressing the importance of security controls. We'll talk a little bit about what we mean by aspects of controls, what's involved, things like that. But it's the foundation of any business, really, the controls that you have in place to properly govern the processes in your business and serve, again, the consumers. And third-party service providers and what should be an SLA. SLA is just service level agreement, and it's essentially the performance factors or elements that are identified or called out within the body of a contract or as an addendum to a contract. It'll hit some things that are performance related. Others are just sort of crossing the T's and dotting the I's regarding the organizations having certain things they must have, like right to audit, facet for maintaining software if you're a development firm in escrow and availability and things of that nature. So it's kind of interesting and eye-opening for sure if you haven't been involved in procurement. As we move through, we're going to talk about ongoing risk management, broad topic, lots of exciting stuff to cover there too. So we'll talk about self-assessing versus independent assessments. We'll talk about security officers and kind of their role a little bit in that process. And we'll talk about some frameworks and things. So it's kind of going to cover a lot of broad areas in that area. And then coming back to like best practices, right? So we're all governed by different, whether it's state, federal, or even industry regulations or standards and things. We're all governed by different bodies, but at the end of the day, also, it comes down to best practices to, protect and promote your business, and also again, always the consumer at the end of the day, who is the foundation of all of it, right? That's why we're in business to work and serve with other, consumers throughout the industry. So a lot of items there. We'll touch on a few of the regs out there. I personally came from banking, so I'll touch on that here and there and some of the pretty stringent requirements that the FFIEC has out there, and I'll draw some, with Rachel's assistance, some comparisons between other standards like PCI, as where QSAs, we deal with that a lot. And also SOC 2 Type 2 audits, which in the banking arena is a de facto standard. So kind of cool stuff. And then, like I said, please don't be shy. Ask your questions. Nick will get them to Rachel and I, and we'll be glad to field those. I think that's how we'll get the most out of this. Okay, so thank you very much.
So kind of like Jerry started to mention, there's multiple perspectives when you look at a service level agreement, right? There's the organization and there's the service provider. So from the organization's perspective, you're engaging with a service provider maybe to help perform your operations, meet strategic needs, or outsource services in some way to a third party. And you need to make sure that these partners of yours are aligned. Got a little slide.
Sorry.
Advance there.
My bad.
So you want to make sure that your partners and your third parties are aligned with your organization's goals, your mission, the standards that you uphold, right? You want to make sure this is a good fit for your organization and that they are contracted to do the exact same thing that your company is going to do, that they uphold your same level of security and compliance. So on the other end, as a service provider, you want to build and grow your trust, right? You want to show that you're a reliable provider and build a long-term relationship with your organization, demonstrate your reliability, security, and compliance in providing these services, while not at the same time raising the risk level to the organization, right? You want to provide value without putting the organization at risk of compromise or data loss. So how can you find the best fit for this agreement, for the service level agreement, and finding the right service provider? That would involve thorough vetting, evaluating the reliability and security measures of the service provider, right? What kind of industry are you in? What standards do you need to adhere to? And how can the third party ensure that these are met?
So when you look at this too, good points, Rach. And when you look at these items too about the vetting aspect, I spoke briefly as I was covering the agenda on procurement, and it's different for many businesses, of course, but at the foundation of it, we're looking for adherence to policies that govern how the procurement process follows. But also you'll see when we get into some of the other slides that in these different industries, the laws, the standards, the guidance that is provided in these and some of the frameworks as well, you'll see there are requirements surrounding third-party vendor management programs, and we'll touch on that a little bit and what's required, what elements are involved in a third-party vendor management program versus just a policy, and we'll touch on that, the details of what difference is between a policy and a program. So there's a lot of things involved in this, and having a good program in place that's repeatable for your organization will serve you well. So when you look at the components, that are involved in when we talked about service level agreements and things like that, the agreements themselves, they are basically setting, think of it like this, they're setting the expectation. So if I'm in an organization A and I'm looking to provide services to my consumers, I'm looking for a business that has the same security standards as my business does, right? So I want to make sure that they demonstrate controls are in place. So when I do engage into a contractual relationship with them, they are protecting the information that my consumers are entrusting us with, right? So it's an extension of your business. And but at the end of the day, and while there may be some liability, sure, on them, if there's a compromise, it's still your business that's impacted and the consumers through your business. So while they'll have some pain to it, it needs to be these engagements need to be entered into very carefully, and you need to literally cross the T's, dot the I's on these contracts and the agreements. You want to have things in there, though, elements in there that speak about performance, right? So where the banking world I came from, I worked also not only in a financial institution, but as a service provider. I later moved into that role, and we had uptime requirements in our service level agreement to the banks and credit unions that we process for. So you can have performance elements. Then you also have things like not just uptime or availability with that. You'll have security requirements, which is huge and becoming more and more prevalent in today's world. So those are elements you want in there. And then if you're dealing with specific vendors or third-party providers that have, say, their business is software development, and they're developing code for your business, right? And maybe it's a key piece of your business. And if that company was to, at some point go belly up, where does that leave your business? So there are provisions typically in these contracts and service level agreements that have what's called, maintaining the source code in escrow. And essentially and it really is financial firms that do this, but essentially as software releases come out, the source code is maintained by an independent third party, and you have rights to that if the other company goes into bankruptcy or is no longer in existence. So there's other components too, and Rachel, I'll touch on those as we move deeper into this presentation. Last thing, right to audit. This is one of the bigger parts of this, right? So at the end of the day, when you're doing business with a third party provider, and these folks are, again, they're very instrumental. They're needed these days. Most businesses are utilizing some form of third party provider, whether it's hosting services. And when we use a few here at Compass as well, and we vet them very, very strongly and stringently. You want to make sure that if something was to go wrong, or you want to prove that indeed they do have security controls in place, this clause for right to audit is very, very powerful, and it empowers the organization to oversee, to verify that these third-party providers, do indeed have their ducks in a row as it relates to controls to protect the data that they're entrusted with. So it's a big thing, and we'll also delve deeper into that piece, especially because there's a lot of ways you can do that effectively.
So as basic as it may seem, every single business needs security controls, right? They're crucial in operating and making sure that your business essentially stays afloat. You have data and assets to protect, and you need to make sure that your employees are acting in a way that will keep everything protected. And even beyond that, third parties and service providers need to act in the same way to make sure that your data and assets are protected and secure. That's where audits come in. So there's GRC platforms, turnkey checklist audits. GRC is governance, risk, and compliance. It's kind of a software tool to conduct an audit. And then on the other hand, there's traditional audits. So there's a stark difference between, a quick GRC turnkey audit, checklist audit, and, a thorough, rigorous audit, such as a SOC 2 Type 2. So when looking at, your options, maybe it's quicker, maybe it's cheaper to do a checklist audit or, some kind of GRC solution, but are you really sure that your controls are secure, and operating in the way that they should be? Are you able to sleep at night? Or, maybe you're worried that your business is at higher risk just because you wanted to check the box and, be compliant to some standard. You really can't do shortcuts with an audit. You can't be operating in a way that your business and your sensitive information and sometimes customer information may be at risk. So you don't want to cut corners when it comes to an audit. You need to do the thorough route. And like I said, SOC 2 Type 2 is an example of that. So that's where, kind of compliance versus security. You can be compliant, you can check the box, or you can, overachieve and have comprehensive long-term ongoing security in your organization and as well as with your third parties.
So this key, great points, Rachel. This key, this slide here, a couple key points on it that really, they really rub me the wrong way. I'll tell you honestly, that's why we brought it into our education today. I came from the banking world, as I mentioned, and as a data center, we were audited by an independent third party via, well, at the day that date way back when my hair wasn't white, it was a SAS 70. It's evolved over the years, but it's an independent audit performed by the AICPA, and the SOC 2 Type 2. We'll cover a little bit more elements of it, but essentially, it really is the de facto standard in many countries, primarily the United States, but other organizations are doing these SOC 2s as well. And essentially, at the end of the day, they are a set of controls that are being tested around your environment and the services that you are providing or offering to, whether it's another business or directly to consumers and things of that nature. So it's a demonstration of those controls and adherence. And these platforms that pop up, I've seen Avantif and I've seen these other ones that are out there. There's so many of those. And I'll tell you, I like to reference the bank world. There were other institutions out there we've dealt with over the years as we perform audits, and they introduced some systems that provide quick audits. And I'll tell you what, the federal examiners didn't like it, didn't have at it. So while today, many of these folks that are going, hey, let me get that little $5,000, $10,000 platform audit done, a checklist audit, it doesn't involve an on-site walkthrough of the facility. It doesn't involve interviewing of key parties in there. It does not involve the detailed interrogation that you will get through a detailed audit. Like a lot of organizations, we're not the only ones that do it. So when you're vetting those providers, sit down and ask yourself, why am I doing this in the first place? If it's just to get by, check the box, move on. But and good luck to that. Pray well to your God. But at the end of the day, there's no shortcut. There's no silver bullet for these solutions. So you get what you pay for. And then true security, like Rach said, is kind of dovetails into it, right? It's like, do I want to be compliant or do I want to be secure? If you focus on security and putting the appropriate controls in place the right way, you're going to see that compliance follows very, very easily.
Jerry, I'm going to pause you there. I have a first question, and thank you to the individual who asked it. Feel free, everybody else, if you want to pause us at any moment to ask a question, you are more than welcome to. The question was, the right to audit does not constitute right to monitor or right to assess as part of the ConMon process for the third party. Does it mean that there is a need for additional clause on a contract for right to monitor and or right to assess at any time?
And that's quite almost a legal question, right? It's borderline legal, but the answer is, for right to audit is again to have that third party independent audit in place by you're requesting it of this service provider. If they don't have that, then you can exercise the right to audit those controls around the services that you're contracting them for. The addition on that, with the question they were asking about the right to monitor, it is a form of monitoring, right? Because it's an annual requirement. Most of these contracts are recurring, right? For availability, for example, you may sign a 3-year contract. So through that 3-year period, they need to demonstrate that they have their controls in place. It is monitoring, sort of. If you were looking for enhanced monitoring, you may want to add additional provisions in there, but I would run it by your attorneys. And as the third party provider, they'll do the same, right? To make sure that we're meeting in the middle. Hopefully that answered the question.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Jerry. And if anybody else has another question, feel free to drop it in. Thank you, Jerry.
Great. Thanks, folks. Yeah, keep the questions going. I think that's how we'll get the best out of this thing. So we know businesses are using vendors, collaborating with partners to enhance the supply chain efficiency is a key today. Like I mentioned, folks are all using, or most folks are using a number, not just one third-party provider. And honestly, as we talk about key chain and the stability of this and availability, sometimes you might even need a backup depending on how highly available the service is that you're looking at. Like think about services as simple as internet access or internet capability. A lot of organizations have backup connectivity through fiber or other channels so that if the primary is down, you've got a backup. So, I mean, risk assess your own business. Self-assessments are great and very, very powerful. And I think that you need to consider that as you move forward through this. So how are you going to prove that, the trustworthiness to a risk averse buyers, right? So we're looking at some key considerations. I touched on them a little earlier. There are certifications like ISO 27001. There are standards, which is not a law or a regulation or anything. It's a standard by the payment card industry. The data security standard has been around for years, and it has a set of standards and requirements that also touch on the controls around your environment. HIPAA, which is in the healthcare industry, protecting consumers' electronic private healthcare information, or hard copy PHI. And then we touched on the SOC audits, the SOC 2 specifically. And one quick note: there's SOC 2 Type 1s and there's SOC 2 Type 2s. A Type 1 is the design of the controls, typically within your policies, your procedures, and such documents like that, where your policy statements exist, and they are, they call out the clearly defined roles and responsibilities within that organization. That's a design and control. And the SOC 2 Type 2 is just testing that design, right? Do we do the things we say we're doing? So that's what SOC 2 Type 2 is, and it's over a testing period that is extended. Rachel will cover some more of that later. Security first culture. You know what? We look at organizations today and the increased price tag associated with keeping very talented folks on staff for the as your chief information security officer. And this role, by the way, this function, it's dealt with in different ways from organizations, but as budgets are always tighter and tighter and threats are increasing, a lot of organizations are using the virtual chief information security officer role, and it's effective. We're serving. We have a group that does just that, and they're serving. And there's a lot of businesses that do that. And if you're interested in those, look into it. There's a lot of organizations out there like ours that do it, but they provide security services as a sort of a team approach versus one person that you maintain on staff, and often having a backup to that role, which is very costly with benefits and things like that. So consider that as maybe an option to kind of help you meet your budget and pull in the strength of the whole team versus just one individual. Always looking at the key elements of a security officer role, though, right? Which is least privileges. And when we talk about some of the regs out there, as well as the standards like PCI, the PCI data security standard specifically calls out least privileges. Requirement 7 addresses that aspect of it, but you'll see in the other one, the other laws and regs that we talk about today, that it's a requirement everywhere, right? To minimize access to only those parties that need access. The risk assessment speaks for itself, right? We talked about that several times over already. It can be a self-assessment. There's a little bit of potentially slanted or tainted results because you're assessing yourself versus an independent assessment where a third-party provider comes in and provides a risk assessment or an audit to your environment. A lot more independence there, yielding better and more trustworthy results. And then, there's other elements, and one of the bigger ones is security awareness. Folks always ask us, when you guys are working with your clients on different things, it's like, what's the biggest offense? And I'll tell you, it's the people. It's the education that you provide the people on your team, whether it's to help enforce physical controls or logical controls in your environment. They're your strongest point, but they can be your weakest as well. And the way to change that around to the right side of the house is by education, and keep that continuous education going, because the threats are ever changing. And then just straight up transparency, where security white papers, audit summaries, and then breach notifications. These elements, are requirements also in SLAs. So you'll see provisions in there for maintaining certainly an incident response plan for the organization that you may be entering a contractual relationship with, but also breach notification. You have a right to know. If I'm using a third-party provider and they're breached, I want to know, and I want that in my contract to make sure that they're looking out for our best interest.
And Jerry, I am going to pause you guys for one quick moment. You may see a poll pop up on your screen. We are just going to ask a quick poll question regarding the registration process. So I just wanted to mention that, Jerry and Rachel, if you see that, feel free to X out of that.
Thanks, Nick.
Thank
Sure.
you.
Thanks, Nick.
So we've talked a lot about, partnerships and engaging with the service provider. So let's talk more specifics about what aspects you might see in an agreement like this, a service level agreement. So there's, like we covered a little bit before, Jerry mentioned availability. There's often a clause, guaranteeing a certain amount of uptime, 99% or higher. Continuous availability, not too many disruptions for your customers or for your employees with your system. That's a pretty common one you'll see on this type of agreement. Incident response time. You need to hold your vendors accountable of, the responsibilities in the incident response plan. How quickly can they respond to an incident and, resolve an issue to maintain your business continuity? This is kind of touching on what I was saying before. Your partnerships, you need to ensure that they have the same motives as you, that they uphold your same business mission and, expectations. Moving on, data security requirements. What kind of data do your vendors have access to? That's kind of what you need to identify first when detailing this clause. Do they have access to sensitive information, customer information, business information? That'll help you dictate how you need to protect that information and how to hold your vendors accountable to achieve this. Your sensitive data is not only sensitive to you, but you may be held accountable by your customers as well. It could be reputational damages if there's a breach and lots of customer information is exposed. So this is a very, very important clause to have in a service level agreement to hold vendors accountable to different encryption levels, access controls, and maintaining regular monitoring and assessments to see that your service providers are upholding this kind of standard. And finally, compliance and audit rights. This is touching on that right to audit clause that we received a question on earlier. Maintaining that kind of compliance and adherence, like we said, SOC 2 Type 2 and other types of audits. It's just maintaining that same level of compliance that your business is operating with, keeping your vendors held to the same standards that you are to maintain smooth operations and security of your data and information.
Yeah, one other thing. Thanks, Rachel. I look at a few elements here that catch my attention when we talk about incident response. Certainly, it should be in each of these contracts with these third-party providers, ensuring that they've got an incident response plan, that it's tested, that they train their staff on it, and they provide you the results, or at least an audit letter suggesting or sharing the results of their annual testing. We did that when I was at a financial the service data center for the financial industry that I work for, and likewise with business continuity. And those two roads have really crossed, right? More and more with the increasing threats to all of our businesses and even all of us directly as consumers. There's no substitute, no workaround. That you really need a very viable business continuity plan and an incident response plan. And it starts with understanding the elements of your business. And what I mean by that is simply this: when we go in to perform an audit of any kind, we're going in and we first identify where the confidential information resides in their business. If it's a PCI QSA audit, for PCI, we're going in there and we're identifying physically and logically where payment card information resides. If we're going into the healthcare industry and we're performing an audit against the HIPAA law, we're looking at the controls in there. We're looking to see where any physical private healthcare information is, or any electronic healthcare information resides. Name an industry, name whatever the private information or confidential information is. At the end of the day, it boils down to where that is and how you are protecting it at rest and in motion. Here's our little poll that popped up. Maybe I can cancel this silly thing. Anyway, so you're looking at that. That's the foundation of, when folks come in and say, "No," like I've had clients come in, "Hey, can you help us build a continuity plan?" Absolutely. We're going to begin with a business impact analysis to understand where that confidential information is, understand the different critical functions in the business. And I've had some clients go, "No, let's go right to the business. Let's skip that BIA and let's go right to building a plan." And I'm like, that is the foundation of the plan. It's like, let's go ahead and build a house, but not put any foundation under it. It's like, that doesn't work. And it'll collapse immediately. So really, when you look into your contracts, ensure they've got both of those key elements. And in your business yourself, again, make sure you've got them. You've trained your staff on your incident response plan and your business continuity plan, and you test it on a regular basis. So, yeah, it didn't go. There we go. Risk assessment and monitoring. So this is a key part of the whole thing, right? When we say we've got controls in place, this is a way for an organization to ensure that they stay in place. For example, I may have controls in place to restrict unauthorized access to a particular area of my business or my building, and it might include a lock, a camera, whatever, sign in, things of that nature. People may need to be escorted or should be escorted to these areas. And when an auditor comes in and tests it and sees these controls are functioning, that is, the camera's still working, the door's locked, they are escorted, they signed in, that's great. Those controls are functioning and operating effectively. But when we leave, often these things aren't followed completely. So, for example, you go back, and what an assessment will do, self-assessing or even internal risk assessing, and then even having independent assessing, risk assessing performed is great. It's a great way of making sure that after the audit or after the assessment, that ongoing you're continuing to make sure that your controls are still functioning. You're making sure that your folks, your staff, are continuing to follow those policies that your company has that adhere to the laws and regulations in that industry. It's a key component. So that's why the risk assessing piece and the monitoring of that is so important. And risk assessing really is one piece of monitoring. Another facet of monitoring, we go through and we monitor networks, for example. That is, when we talked earlier about data and data flow, I said, encryption at rest and in motion. We can monitor that with systems, and you really need to be doing that. And as it comes to like saying, scanning your network to ensure that there's no tax on your critical assets. This is another way of monitoring, performing vulnerability assessments. We got a group that does that all the time, and Jesse Roberts heads it up. It's a key component. So vulnerability assessing and penetration testing are other ways of sort of assessing and monitoring the effectiveness of your controls and such. So, and it kind of aligns with the next one, right? Continuous compliance tracking. When you talk about that, it's kind of like there's some great ways of doing it, tools that are in there, and I'm always all for utilizing tools where possible as a way to kind of spot check and make sure that you're in line with what you wanted to be doing and your business is following the strong the requirements of the laws and regs out there, but that it's ongoing, not just when the auditors are knocking at the door. Last aspect of this one, and we talk about proactive risk mitigation. So assessing and monitoring is a way for you to, catch something as soon as possible, right? So maybe even before, it's announced that there's a threat with a particular software application you may be using, or that there's a threat from a broken control. Maybe the camera broke in my example earlier. So if you're assessing all the time, you can see you'll be testing these controls yourself. And whether it's a self-assessment, like I mentioned, or another internal assessment, or even a third-party assessment, it's your way of saying, is it still working? And that's kind of the key element of that.
Another question, if I can just quickly pause you guys. Kind of is on the same line with the continuous conversation that you were just mentioning. With threats shifting so quickly, like AI phishing or vendor breaches, what are some concrete ways organizations are shifting from just doing one big review a year to building that continuous culture you mentioned?
Yeah, so great question. So it starts with the foundation which we touched on earlier being the policy set, right, of an organization. So having strong policies and enforcement of those policies. The policies are going to have there's some key elements of policies, but we only got about 20 minutes left, so I won't dig deeply into that aspect. But I will say having a good policy set is important, and that's where the controls reside in your environment, right? So starting with that and then going through and monitoring that these controls are still functioning. And what was the other second part of that question, Nick?
Regarding shifting to more of a culture of security, rather than just doing one big review a year.
Yeah, I'll add something for that. So like Jerry was mentioning earlier, the people can be the strongest or the weakest point of your organization. So making sure that your annual security awareness trainings are relevant and include industry relevant attacks or trending things that are you seeing in the industry, like AI, like things like that are ransomware, things that are kind of trending in the industry that may put your organization at risk. Making sure your employees are educated about those things makes them easier to spot. There's less weak points within your organization if your employees are educated on how to catch a phishing attack or what to look for a ransomware attack. You can kind of spot it early and manage it early, and that's how you keep the culture educated and up to date with what's going on in the industry.
Just based on what you said, I'm going to throw a quick follow-up question at you. You mentioned annual phishing training. Is that the cadence you'd recommend, or would you recommend a more frequent cadence?
Yeah, much more frequent, right? I mean, at a minimum, you'll see in these laws and regs and standards even that's like, oh, annual security awareness training is required, and phishing is certainly a part of that. We highly recommend ongoing. So we've got folks doing it. We're doing it for a lot of our clients, or most of our clients, and others do some of their own. It's not a very expensive endeavor, but we highly recommend it's an ongoing assessment of yourself, right, through phishing campaigns. Still some of the biggest ways these threats are coming in is through phishing attacks, targeted phishing attacks or spear phishing attacks through email and folks clicking on links and doing things like that. I'll tell you one quick big thing on this, and one if you get half of what Rachel and I said, I'll tell you what. Let's look at this. I get tons of emails myself personally every day as one of the owners and co-founders of Compass, and I'm getting peppered with stuff left and right, even if it comes from a colleague. Three things. Number one, by the way, you get hundreds of emails. How can I possibly hover over and look at these and see, looking for a clue like I'm an investigator? Well, what if I just remember Jerry's three rules? Number one, I do not click on links in an email. If I get an email from my business partner, Bill De Palma, right now, I'm going to reach out to Bill. Hey, Bill, did you send this? I just want to make sure he did. I do this for my wife. She wonders what I'm doing. But anyway, it's like, no, don't click on links. I'll call you. It takes 2 seconds. And I confirm it. Likewise, attachments, big way that things get in. People download attachments and all the time, and it really can cause these attacks, these malware attacks to infest your system. And if you're part of a network, some of these can crawl the network immediately. So don't download these things. Come on now. And then the third one is, so maybe they don't have a link and maybe they don't have an attachment, but some of them are swift enough to they'll put things in like information about, hey, I'm a client of yours, Compass, and here's a change of our billing address. We'd like to send send the payments here now instead. It's like, no, I don't take directions like that. We've had folks that we worked with that got compromised from even a wire transfer information that was sent. It was instructional within the email, and they followed it. It's like, you know what? Any of this important stuff, pick the phone up, make a phone call, send a Teams message, a text. Takes literally seconds. So there's three things. Don't click on links. Don't download attachments, and don't do what they say without first calling a separate known number to that party. And it's that simple. So we're going to move on with that one. I was preaching, right?
So yeah, on to the next agenda item regarding industry compliance. It may seem daunting, complicated. We kind of talked about lots of regulations, lots of laws to adhere to. It differs by industry and by organization. Like I was kind of touching on, your business model and your operations will dictate the things that are secure that you need to protect and the regulations and laws that you need to follow. So I was kind of just saying, look at this first item here, almost like alphabet soup. There's lots of regulations and frameworks. At their core, they're all set to protect data and secure the information that your organization holds. So these protection and privacy standards, all organizations must follow. It's just going to look a little bit different based on the industry that you're in. We touched on PCI, we touched on HIPAA, and there's many more that we can touch on as well. So like I said, the importance of compliance extends just beyond yourself. with your vendors, you need to make sure that they're compliant as well, because if you're not, you can have lots of consequences like legal penalties, and sometimes even more monetary value of loss could be your reputation and your customer trust. If you have a breach and lots of customer data is exposed or lost, maybe you lose business, and over year, that's even more losses than just a penalty or whatever. And finally, compliance will ensure your operational integrity. You can sleep at night, you're operating to the best of your ability, and your risk is mitigated to an acceptable level. Vendor accountability, I kind of just touched on this as well. You want to make sure that your third-party vendors maintain their compliance. This is, again, the right to audit clause and continuous monitoring to hold them accountable to these standards and make sure that your organization is not at risk due to the people that you're contracting.
Yeah, good points, Rachel. And one of the things that stands out on this slide for me is you talk about reputational risk. The legal penalties are minute and minor compared to if God forbid there was a compromise at your organization. The cost in reputation is huge. The penalties, see, the loss of business is very difficult to measure. I have some clients that really are, they know downtime, what it costs them if they're down for minutes, hours, whatever. But it's kind of hard to measure something like this. But in the long term, the results are extreme in terms of the loss of business and what it costs your business overall because you went through a compromise. Think about it. If you're representing a business today, and we all work somewhere typically, and you've got a choice. I can pick company A or B, but company A was just in the news because they were compromised. How it happened and the details of that aren't really even germane per se. Even they say, we cleaned it up, it looks good, Listen, if I have a choice and all things being equal, I'm going with the company that's got the other aspects that are in place, but were not compromised. So really, it's so important to focus on those controls and making sure that you're doing it and holding your vendors accountable to ensure that they're doing the same things. That is to say, enforcing their controls so that they are able to serve you and then inevitably and your clients. So we got a couple things here, and next few slides, I want to we touched a little bit on the laws, regs, different things here. This isn't SOC 2 Type 2 as part of right to audit. You're going to see it a lot because I mentioned it's kind of a de facto standard here in the U.S. If I'm picking a third-party provider, one of the first questions you typically are asking is for SOC 2 Type 2. You might also ask for it there, dealing with payment card information. Sure, you may ask for a PCI. AOC attestation of compliance, but over the next two slides, we're going to give you those two examples. There are so many more. You could ask questions about CCPA, the California Privacy Act, and man, there's a lot to that. I'd love to dance through that if someone's got questions. But we're going to give you these two examples to get you started.
So a SOC 2 Type 2, Jerry mentioned before, there's a SOC 2 Type 1 and a SOC 2 Type 2. The SOC 2 Type 1 is the control design, the policies, the procedures, right? How you detail that you will carry out your procedures. Is that designed effectively? And then the SOC 2 Type 2 is operating. Is it operating effectively? And like Jerry mentioned, it's a period of time. There are defined start and end dates for the reporting period of a SOC 2 Type 2, whereas a SOC 2 Type 1 is an as of date. It's kind of as of this day, the controls were designed effectively. Whereas operating effectiveness, it needs to be every single day throughout the start to end period that is defined. And SOC 2 Type 2 has 5 trust services criteria. That's what they're called. And you can see their security, availability, processing integrity, confidentiality, and privacy. Security is the main one. It is required on every single SOC 2, and it's sometimes referred to as common criteria because it's required on every single one. It's the biggest one, and you need to have it. Right to audit, we kind of talked about this. I won't get too deep into it, but the SOC 2 can fulfill a right to audit clause. It's an independent audit. CPA performs it, so it's a good way to carry out that right to audit clause for a service provider trying to satisfy that. And it's a good way to verify the compliance with an independent audit. It's not a control self-assessment or an internal audit. This is an external independent audit performed. And like Jerry said, it kind of is better integrity and trustworthiness of results having an outside source come and perform this audit for you.
Yeah, thanks, Rachel. One other thing that you should know when you talk about this type of an audit too, it is an audit performed and it's through the AICPA, the American Institute of Certified Public Accountants, and Compass Assurance Team has and does perform assurance audits like this, so we know we're also audited by our peers. So it's not a case where I hope this firm's good. They went and they perform these audits, so everything must be good. If these practices aren't properly followed, every independent audit, every SOC audit, then when we're audited, we're under scrutiny, right? So it's forcing the organizations, whether it's Compass Assurance Team or another firm that you're using, it's forcing these firms to make sure they are following all the processes that are required to ensure that when they deliver this report, you can sleep at night.
Let me pause you for one more question here.
Yeah, of course.
Give you guys a chance to take a breath. There's so much buzz around AI in security right now. Are you seeing it make a real difference, or is it mostly hype at this stage?
Wow. Yeah, no, it is. It's for real. And there's two perspectives on this. You look at AI everywhere, and it's a wild, wild west right now. I've got firms coming to us right now, like, where do I start? And it really starts with, what do you want to do with it, right? Because uh, even if you're not embracing it, trust me, your employees are using ChatGPT or other AI solutions all of the time, and that's a fact. It's ghost AI, or it's basically unauthorized AI within your business. So you can't stand by the sidelines and watch it go by either from a business perspective, because your competitors are going to utilize it and they're going to fly by you with phenomenal results. It's a good thing, not a bad thing, but it needs to be handled like any opportunity in a proper way by putting controls around it. So start with what your business objective is. What do I want to do? Maybe you start with build a small committee. We're guiding a lot of clients right now, but I'll quickly go through it. Just, you want to go through and understand what you want to use it for and how you want to use it. Establish a group to look at that, then build policies around it. How do we want to use it? The do's and don'ts. So it should fold into your acceptable use policy. It should be also, there should be procedures that roll up to that. There's so much to it, including monitoring and third-party providers. For example, you may say, I'm not going to use it. We're not going to use it for this or that. But you may have a contract that's a multi-year contract with a third-party provider, and they weren't using it because it wasn't around, and now it is. And they're folding it in. The contract didn't say we couldn't do it. And all of a sudden you're saying we don't use it, and there they are using it. So fold it into your monitoring as part of your third-party vendor program and vendor management program. So that's a key piece to keep it going and monitoring. There's lots of good scanning tools out there that will allow you to also make sure that you're able to monitor and see that people are following your AI policy. So start with what you want to do, build some policies and procedures, look to enforce it by monitoring through scans. Total AI is a product by Qualys. There are others out there that go through and scan for the use and misuse of AI. So hopefully, hopefully it answered the question.
Thank you so
Just
much.
going,
Yeah, I figured that would be a loaded question. We could do a whole webinar on that topic. So
I know.
apologies for derailing you, and thank you for the answer.
Yeah.
And we are running down on 15 minutes. So if anybody has
Yeah.
any other questions, feel free to get them in now.
Yeah, no worries. Thank you, guys. And so just quickly on this one, we've touched on a little bit already. Just letting you know that the things that Rachel and I have been saying ongoing throughout this, these are all not just a suggestion or best practice. These are folded in. These are requirements, of PCI compliance. And as a QSA, Qualified Security Assessor, we enforce this when we go through and perform a report on compliance audit for merchants and service providers all the time. So making sure that you're limiting the data use makes sense. If you limit the use of the data, then it's a smaller footprint to protect at rest and in motion. And great ways, necessary ways of doing this are encryption, right? And using secure channels. So at rest and in motion, we're using encryption to protect the information. And then the instant response coming up again as well, where you've got a requirement for plans to be in place to train and test on these plans and making sure that the third-party providers that you use also are doing this. All right, so we'll move on. Last one, and again, just as an example, there's written agreements and requirements. So when we look at this is funny because the first one is really what we're talking about here with SLA type things. Written agreements with, if you're a merchant or service provider using another service provider, they're requiring in section 12 of PCI that you have written agreements. That's a novel idea, right? So in there, they're going to have these service level agreements that require right to audit. They're going to have security controls. In the case of PCI, it's going to require that the third-party provider also have an attestation of compliance, their own audit, so that you can use them safely and soundly. It goes through like everything. It's scope, right? Scope and permissions. Agreements need to specify who's doing what, right? The data access, permissions to that, and then proving that you're compliant, right? Maintaining this compliance, even though PCI is a point in time audit, as compared to what Rachel gave the example of SOC 2 Type 2, where it's over a period of time, a testing period. I'm doing this for 6 months or a year. I'm proving that my folks are doing it. And whereas PCI is point in time, I'm effectively going in and doing a point in time audit. Are we doing it right now? Yeah, there's some things we look at over the year before, but essentially most of it's literally what's occurring now. Am I following these controls today? And the minute I walk out the building, they can patch around the firewall, they can do whatever they want. But right then and there, they were compliant. Lastly, reducing the risk, right? Verifying compliance reduces risk, of data breaches and penalties related to non-compliance with PCI standards. So this overall, obviously, all of these are geared toward the objective and goal of reducing our risks overall. And it's an ongoing battle, right? If you haven't gathered that already.
So I'll kind of bring it back to some of the main points that we covered, some of the key takeaways from this session. Trust is earned through transparency, right? And how can you achieve that? Audits, ongoing, assessments and ways to prove your compliance, and even above that, security. Like we said, there shouldn't be any kind of shortcuts with your audits. You can save now, but you'll be paying even more later. So we really recommend that you do a thorough, independent audit to prove your security and your compliance, and maintain your internal controls and a secure way of operating. Like we talked about today, vendors, third parties are almost in every single business. So maintaining a strong relationship starts with that service level agreement. It's crucial for vendor management, ensuring that they maintain security and they're providing value to your business and to your operations without putting you at risk at the same time. And kind of like we said, compliance is great, security is better. If you achieve security, true security for the long run, compliance will follow and won't be, too much of a struggle.
Thanks, Rachel. And one of the examples I wanted to give real quick, because we do have a little bit of time left too. I wanted to give these, and then we'll have plenty of time for questions. So it's one thing for us to preach, talk about this, talk about some of our experiences, and I'll tell you, I'll give you examples of the lack of that of enforcement and of policies, and even supporting why we need to have these controls in place and demonstrating they're in place ongoing. Sure, again, we'll say for the week. I say week because it's just saying, oh, I'm compliant because I had to meet this requirement, that the bare bones minimum, versus I'm secure. This particular organization we were doing work with, and they were compromised, and they had in Word the policies that we had actually worked with them on to ensure that they had protections in place, but they weren't enforcing it, right? So they had a policy for data classification, and if you don't know what that is, it's really where the requirement and the policy says, hey, look, if you've got certain assets that are critical to your business, where confidential information resides, because remember I said that before, it's physically and logically where confidential information resides in your business, and then you put controls around that. So this organization, didn't follow their data classification policy. They had a server. I was on-prem. My head of cybersecurity, CyberGuard, Compass CyberGuard, Jesse Roberts, was pulled into this as part of the solution. But I'm on site, and they're saying they notified us that they were compromised. A server was, and they had all kinds of stuff happening. Essentially, they were subject to a ransomware attack while we're there. And I'm like, well, did you guys, you classify that system? I mean, in other words, do you know if it's? And by the way, quick note on classification: there are 4 levels. So there's this public information, there's marketing stuff, right? It's what you want the world to see. So that's benign. But then you have internal communications. Maybe I'm sending a colleague information. It's not intended for the world, but if I'm following my policies, I'm not going to have anything in there that can hurt me. But it's not intended for the outside world. The big one is really that confidential band. So I've got confidential information is the next tier I want to speak of. And the 4th level higher than that is restricted. It's quite related, but it means even only a few people in the business. Maybe I'm merging with another business, or we're being acquired, whatever. That's kind of a smaller tier, but above the bigger band, which we're speaking about right now, which is that confidential information. So if you classify a system as confidential, that means I need to have a set of controls in place for data that goes in that thing and out of that thing and that thing itself. Physical controls if it's a server on-prem, logical controls as well. I mean, there's a whole complement of things that are needed. This organization did not classify it. They literally said, look, yeah, the ransomware says, the attack posted a literal, certain dollar amount that was due. They send you a screen print. This is no joke. They laughed. They said, we're not going to pay. We don't pay that stuff. We'll rebuild the server. We'll blow it. There's nothing on there. We don't believe there's nothing on there. Literally less than, I mean, it was 3 hours or 2 hours later, Jesse goes on to the dark web. He located where it was posted, and he brought down spreadsheets of all of their client data. I mean, everything, social security numbers, all this client information. This company was an international company. So you look at GDPR, which is international, laws governing work with consumers that live or work in the European Union. So there were international privacy laws that were busted. There were state and federal laws that were broken as well, or through this compromise. This cost them tons and tons of money, in restitution and ongoing monitoring of the consumer accounts that were compromised. It was an absolute crap show. And literally, if they had enforced their policies completely through classification and ongoing monitoring, this would have been picked up and should have been picked up at the doorstep and would not have got in. But if it did get in, it could have been isolated and dealt with. You bring in, ransomware folks that deal with this. So through your insurance policies that have riders on how to deal with, the protection of the information. So you've got instant responders, and they'll come in and move forward with the information, looking at log files and seeing how, the organization has moved forward in protecting, and if data indeed did leave the facility, what the next steps are. And then there's digital forensics, where we, after the fact, we can maybe track back where it came from. That's a separate discipline. There's value to that, but it's not for every situation, because a lot of organizations, if you caught the attack, you really want to put it, hey, I found who it was, and we're going to press charges. Or do you just want to make this noise go away from the public eye as quick as possible? So there's a dual-edged sword there regarding it. But that's a real case study. We have a lot of them. Folks often are like, and you look at some of these compromises that are happening. A lot of them think that it won't happen to them, and they'll literally say that, and it's like, yeah, it didn't happen to them until it did. And then where do they stand now? And so it's quite significant. That's my case study example I wanted to share with you folks. We've got about 7 or 8 minutes here. Nick, were there any questions?
I do. I have a few questions. You actually just answered one of them, so thank you. Your case study answered the first question. The second question was, have you seen any company scope in and ask their direct vendor who is using an AI model as a service from another vendor, provider X is a fourth party vendor, to provide specific information about what AI models are being used and what AI governance and risk assessment controls that the vendor are doing to give the customer confidence for the security and application that the vendor is providing to the customer? So I know that's a big question. I'll drop that in the chat too as well if you want to reread that.
So no, right. No, it's an excellent question, because the first part of it would be like upfront now, moving forward. I would hope that all of you, as you enter the new contracts, have provisions. So today we're talking about AI. Tomorrow, what's the next new thing, right? So trying to have that, as your business, as the third party provider that you're doing business with, as they change their models and start including some of the newer technologies, that you're brought abreast of that and have an opt-out option. You may say, you know what, I don't buy into this, or I don't want any part of it, or at least I want the right to understand. Through your right to audit, you would see this, but still you want to find out what's going on and how they're using it. It may be contrary to the way you want it used. You may not agree with the way it's being used. So with that said, I would go through my existing contracts. I would look at those and reach out to them, the ones that you're sending customer information to, especially, and finding out if they're using AI at all. There's no downside to asking them today. And then if they are, asking them what ways they're utilizing it, and then to ensure that those controls are in place appropriately. And then again, as your right to audit, you're going to make sure that was audited as part of that. If you say, hey, that's cool, I just wanted to know the methods, but as you get your annual, maybe it's a SOC 2 Type 2 that comes back next year, make sure it's in the scope of that. Make sure they have not in Section 3 carved that out of the system description. It's imperative that be included. So there's a lot of things to consider. Going forward, easier because you can put it in there now. But going backwards, you're looking at some that are there. But there's no, you can definitely get an amendment to your current contract. So don't think it's a lost opportunity for you.
I have another question here, and I like this question a lot. For companies without a dedicated security budget, what's the single most cost-effective control you recommend first?
Without a security budget, well, education is going to be the enforcement of your policies through folks knowing what's allowed, what's not allowed, but the systems are in place and protecting that confidential information. So I've got no or very little money, and I can't even include maybe complementing my security staff with a virtual chief information security officer. We'd mentioned we do that. There's other companies that do that. You might want to look at that, because it's a way of, you don't just get one person, you have the knowledge of a team of people to answer a question or to deal with a challenge. is some of our clients will be like, hey, we just had a situation, this threat came in, what are we doing? And you got a whole team of folks that are supporting it. So I'd consider that if your budget can support that. If you have less than that ability, I'm assessing, risk assessing myself. I'm self-assessing. It's really internal dollars, but doing it the right way, and then constantly educating my staff. Understand the challenges and risks today, and tomorrow they're going to change, but trying to continuously stay up on that. And it's a cyclic process, not a one and done.